All righty, welcome everyone. We're just letting everybody in the room. We'll start a couple of minutes as the last people come in.
I feel like with my mic, you can't see my signs in the background, but they're there.
Jessi, before you came on, we were remarking about David's kind of rustic cabin that he's in there.
I know, I like that. That's very
Big
cool.
fan.
Yeah, my Appalachian hideout.
I love it.
All right, well, I think we got our initial crowd. Welcome everybody. My name is David Gordon. I'm the director of the Virginia Project. This is our discussion on how to recruit candidates. We have with us our guests, Jessi Blakely, who is the chairman of Young Republicans.
Hey, everybody.
We have Sean Rastatter, who is vice chair of the Fairfax Republican Party. And we have Doug Simon, who is presently the drug czar of Florida, but he spent the recruiting period for 2021 as the Virginia Project's political director. So welcome Jessi, Sean, and Doug to our discussion. I'm going to be turning around every so often to let people in as they filter, because I'm also playing host. If we have some time at the end, we'll field a few questions, but it's been quite an adventure to get from here to there, so we may end up filling the time with discussion. Okay, so where this all started. This all started at in the aftermath of the 2019 elections. And I think what we all saw there was that the GOP just didn't put up candidates in too many districts, and that really made life very easy for the Democrats. They had to win less than half the seats that constituted their majorities in the legislature. And I think it caught everybody by surprise, and it was a real wake-up call. So we started the discussion about running for every seat. The Virginia Project was formed a few days after that election to get the state parties act back together. And one of the key mission points from day one has been to run a candidate for every single seat, every single time. So what you're going to hear tonight is basically the discussion of the adventure that we had in recruiting candidates for every single seat in 2021, and all that was consequent, of that effort. So, Jessi, you've been deeply involved for the party. What was your impression of the performance of the Republicans in 2019?
Yeah, so I mean, I've said this at GOP meetings for the last couple years. For those of you who haven't met me, I'm the chair of the Virginia Young Republicans. I was, prior to that, our national committee woman. So I represented Virginia to our national organization as well. And I was also a local club chair for Young Republicans in the Hampton Roads area. I now live up in Northern Virginia, but I've been all over the state for the last 5 or 6 years, talking at different Republican units, volunteering on campaigns, talking to candidates, things like that. And so one of the complaints that I heard after the 2019 election was just frustration at every meeting I went to, no matter where it was in Virginia. And I got the question, why didn't RPV recruit a candidate for my district? I don't know how many times. And that question kind of bothered me a little for 2 reasons. One, I think it was clear in 2017, or it should have been clear to our leadership, that the strategy that we were using in only fielding candidates in some districts that we thought were worth it to invest in was not working. In 2017, we kept our majority in the House of Delegates literally by a coin flip, by a name drawn out of a hat, right? We got to the point where we had lost our majority to the degree that it was a matter of chance that we held it in 2017. And then we carried the same strategy along to 2019. And people were very frustrated by that. We lost in 2019, and honestly, we deserved to lose as a party because we were not doing the work that it takes to sustainably win. And so that was a question that I heard. But the second reason why it bothered me was because I felt like for a lot of folks, they did not understand that they could go out and recruit a candidate for their district. They didn't understand that this doesn't have to be a centralized process that the state party needs to lead, and then people, just get what they get, or, vote in primaries or what have you. And so I was really excited to see what Virginia Project was doing last year at the beginning of the year. And it was something that I wanted to get involved in because that was the top frustration that I heard after we lost our majority in 2019. But then when I talked to a lot of GOP leadership, and, there's a lot of great folks, but there's a lot of people who were stuck in that mentality who would say, well, it's not worth it for us to run candidates in these districts. We're going to lose anyway. So why would we put in the legwork to do something like that? And it really was something that I felt was not going to happen from the top down. It had to be a grassroots effort. It had to be a proof of concept where we showed, no, if you can test ground everywhere, it is a better strategy. We can flip some of these seats, and we might not flip them the first year, but we have to contest them if we are going to, pick them back up again in the future. So, it was really great to be a part of this. And there was a lot of people who are a part of it all over Virginia. But I think it's, a good example of what happens when we do listen to the complaints of the base.
Yeah, absolutely. There are a ton of other people that I could have invited to this, and it was hard to pick just a few, but you all were, I guess, closest to the operation that we had here. But Dan Gade and Ron Wright, I saw you're in there. I know you worked hard to fill those seats. And just plenty of names that I could rattle off. But Sean, what was your perspective on the 2019 outcomes?
Yeah, I think everything Jessi said does a really good job of summarizing it. And for those of you who don't know me, my name is Sean Rastatter. Like mentioned, I currently serve as the first vice chair of the Fairfax Republican Party. I don't have a background in politics. I work as an engineer in my day job. My parents were, county workers, and so I got involved in the local party because I didn't like what I saw in my county. In 2019, we ran 5 delegates out of 17 seats. That's 5 candidates for delegate out of 17 seats. And yes, we have 17 seats in Fairfax County. It's almost an entire 1/5 of the entire state's delegates. There's no surprise why we lost the House of Delegates in 2019. When you're only challenging them for maybe a third of the seats in an entire county as large as Fairfax County, it's 1.1 million people, then you're giving up, what is that, 12 free seats, that they've already won, that they don't even have to contest for. If you're playing a game of baseball or basketball, essentially the other team is fielding a team of 9 players and you're only fielding a team of 3. What do you expect to win with that? I mean, that's not a winnable strategy. That's not sustainable long term. So, coming into it after 2019, I helped out with a lot of school board races and a lot of supervisor races. What I realized is, there are 54 seats up for election in 2019, 54 of them up for re-election in 2023. And you have to be able to field a candidate for as many of those as possible. You have to be able to full court press them and make them have to work, because that's money that they spend. That's resources that they spend. That's time and stress that they have to worry about. And they can't go to districts next to you and, befuddle the efforts that you're using. So the notion that we shouldn't run a candidate in every seat, in my opinion, is just a wholly incorrect notion. It's a notion that leads us to lose. What we did in Fairfax County, and again, we've got an incredibly difficult problem. Finding 17 candidates for 17 seats is certainly not an easy thing. I'm not exactly an expert on it. I can give you some practical strategies and techniques that I used over time throughout the year last year. But basically, it starts from asking. I mean, you as the local Republican Party rep, and everyone in this room who isn't, who is involved, I imagine, as a conservative or as a Republican, you represent the Republican Party. You make up the Republican Party. There's not some other subcommittee that RPV has that goes and recruits candidates. Like, if you want a candidate in your seat, you have to go and do that job. Otherwise, it's not going to get done. What I realized is that you have to go ask, and there's ways to do that that give you larger outreach. So, for example, what we did, we've got a listserv of 100,000 people, and for whatever reason in previous years, the Fairfax GOP never sent out an email saying, hey, we want candidates to run, and here are the seats, that have someone running. So about this time last year, I drafted up a letter that basically described the Democrat agenda, the things they were doing that was destroying our Commonwealth. I came up with a series of charts that showed the districts that had no Republican challenger. And at this time last year, there were 12 seats that had no Republican challenger. You describe the area, the zip code, you talk about who currently represents the districts, the notable things that they've done, whether it's gun control, whether it's Kathy Tran and her vicious abortion agenda. If you get the word out there, you kind of establish a scouting report on some of these people, and you send out the message. Now, not every county has a listserv of 100,000 people, but some counties, you can go to your local homeowners association meetings. You go to church, you go to your, your street corners, and you get the message out there. You let people know that there's an opportunity to run for office, and that opportunity could make a difference in the state of Virginia. So that was step number one, is basically you explain and you outreach what the job does. You explain how to file, you give deadlines, you talk about ballot access requirements, how to get the nomination as a Republican candidate, whether that's a primary or a convention. All these things need to be explained, and when you send out that outreach, you've got to be ready to be able to follow up. That's the biggest thing that I didn't realize is, you send out an email to people, and you're probably going to get 80% of the folks who reach out aren't going to be very serious about running. They're just going to like the idea. So, it's an effort thing. It's a time thing. You've got to be able to sit down and have phone calls, coffee breaks with these people and kind of discuss numbers, talk about the reality of them winning. I never sold a false narrative in Fairfax County. I didn't try and tell people, you're going to win all 17 seats. And unfortunately, we didn't win a single of these seats. We lost all 17 of them. But you better believe that those 17 candidates established a base upon which we could win statewide. We increased our vote total by 7%. And that's what allowed us to have, a Youngkin governor, Ed Mieres lieutenant governor, at Winston Sears as attorney general. Sorry, I messed that up, but you guys get the point. So anyway, I'm going on, and this is a really great thing you put together here, David. So I'm happy I'm here, and I'm available to answer any questions that folks might have.
Super. I think part of the reason why we didn't have candidates is that people just assume somebody will run. The idea of, just not having a candidate at all will take most people by surprise until they see their ballot with one candidate on it, which is the Democrat. Okay, so I'm going to get back to the tale of how this all came to be, so we can bring Doug in, not keep him waiting too long. Okay, so I spent most of 2020 just basically evangelizing the concept of running for every seat. And eventually, I think I won everybody over on the merit of nobody had any better idea. All the other ideas had tried and failed, and this was the last idea standing on the table. So in order to execute this, I put up an election tracker, which is just a database of all the seats and who is running for them. And it's focused entirely on the GOP side. So it's focused on, is there a GOP candidate? We would never support the Democrats, so we're not interested in distributing information about them on the tracker. So the tracker is just the GOP side. So for 2021, when the calendar year turned, it came time to put the tracker together, and I started loading up the data on who we had running for office. And by the end of January, it became apparent that we only had about 70 of 100 seats covered. So not long after that, I immediately sent out the alarm. Jessi was one of the very first to respond. And not long after that, I brought on Doug Simon as our political director to take charge of the project of making sure that we had all those candidates. And Doug, you want to give us your perspective on what you came into when you took on that challenge?
Yeah, thanks, David. I want to it seems so long ago, but we all started when this Virginia project came around, and in the election season of Virginia, Republicans nationwide were demoralized. We lost everything, and people have lost hope. They lost hope everywhere, especially in Virginia, where it looked like we had no chance to do much of anything. The state was getting bluer at each election cycle, and we just said, well, let's go back to the fundamentals. The nuts and bolts of campaigns. Let's field a candidate in all 100 seats and let the chips fall where they may. It's going to do a number of great things for the state as a whole, because the rich Democrat incumbents that help out their colleagues, their state party, their funding mechanisms are going to have to be spread out now among, not 100 seats, but a lot more than it would be otherwise. Another one of the goals that we wrote out was we wanted folks, even in the very, very dark blue areas, to have to help with the turnout for the statewide, for Glenn and Jason and Winsome. And that could have made a difference as well, especially in the suburban counties where we had a lot of anger, a lot of activity, and a lot of interest in the campaign as itself. As we identified, I think I probably started right when Sean did. We had about a dozen seats open at the time. And it took a lot of calling a lot of the local officials on the ground in those areas and say, who do you have? Who can we talk to? How can we help them? Is there anybody that we can have a conversation with to try to nudge them into jumping in the race? We also brought in, we had a number of incumbent state legislators like Dave LaRocque and the chairman, Chairman Anderson, would come in and kind of help us close the deal at the end to get these folks off the sideline and field 100 candidates. And that was a huge, it was victories across the board this last cycle in Virginia. And a whole lot of, credit goes to a whole bunch of different things, but, recruiting 100 state delegate candidates is part of it. And we can only hope that next year, we can recruit a full slate of Senate candidates and do the same thing. And then we can, move on to other things that'll help even more. When we recruited the folks, like I think Sean and Jessi both said, you can't just recruit them and then just, move on to the next one. You had to talk about what to expect, how to do this, because some of them are just novices. They're brand new. Open a bank account, the dreaded paperwork that even trips up some incumbents. How to announce and how to think about fundraising. So you got to, when you're doing the recruiting, you also have to say, okay, that's step one. You say yes, and then here's step two, these few things, and then you go on, and then you introduce them, you open the doors for them, you get the county chairman involved, you get the state chairman involved, you just do as much as you can, especially with networking for them, as well as that'll help them with their fundraising. We're always looking for that one. We didn't even think about it, and we didn't have one in Virginia, but that miracle truck driver in New Jersey that took down the Senate president out of nowhere, spent $200 or something. We didn't have that situation in Virginia, but we could have, and that would have been, we could have made, if we had that, David, we would have made him our poster boy. It would have been taking down somebody in leadership that we found that spent $200 and just, it would have been great. Maybe next year in the Senate races. But, and it was dark times for us Republicans, as I said in the beginning. But I am speaking to you guys from Radio Free America. I'm in Tallahassee, working for the governor, and it's really night and day between being in Florida and being in Virginia. It's illegal to have any kind of mandates on anybody in the state. Kids are walking around; they don't have to be masked all day. No one asks for vaccine cards. No one's worried looking over the shoulders that things are gonna, something's gonna get shut down, or there's gonna be this wholesale closing of any kind of people's lives anymore. The governor, I don't know if you guys all know this, but the governor is standing up a state level law enforcement agency for election integrity itself. So no more will there be After an election, you file a complaint with the Secretary of State's office over some irregularity. They investigate it. It takes months down the road. They still release a report and say something was wrong, right? There's law enforcement officials, there's attorneys that are deputized to go in real time into the local area and root out the corruption and keep an eye on things with subpoena power and the full weight of the state government behind them. So all things to look forward to in Virginia. Hopefully we move in that direction. Another great thing down here in Florida, if I could, we were down just in voter registration. Maybe that's something for, as Virginia moves forward, registering more Republican voters. We were down, Republicans in Florida were down some 700,000 voters in the registration game. And we just recently overtook the Democrats in recruiting and registering Republicans. So as of today, as of like a couple of weeks ago, there are more Republicans in Florida than there are Democrats after being down 700,000 some 2 or 3 election cycles ago. So, there's hope, and there is, with the great job that our legislature and Glenn and everybody else is doing, they are doing what we all had hoped. So let's keep supporting them, and then we will. More and more victories will snowball. So, thanks, David.
Excellent. Yeah, that's excellent. Well, we're going to have a little bit of competition as to who can be more of a free state, and you better pick up the pace because we're coming after you. All right. Okay. All right. So. About the end of January, we realized that we had about 70 seats to fill. Now, some of these were low-hanging fruit, and I think some were easier to fill. Jessi and Sean, do you guys want to tell us, what you guys found to be the easier seats to fill, and why you thought that they were, why you thought they were easiest to recruit for?
Yeah, Sean, do you want to take that first since you had 17?
Yeah, sure. I'll go ahead and throw something at that. It's interesting to me because everyone looks at Fairfax County and they go, "It's a blue county," and it's not necessarily been the case historically speaking. As recently as 2015, we had 4 delegate seats. The 4 delegates, namely Jim LeMunyon, Tim Hugo, Dave Albo, and I guess Barbara Comstock, before she became Congresswoman in 2014. But the point I'm trying to get across is kind of, if you look at the concentric circle on the outside, the outer ring of Fairfax County, typically more conservative, more Republican areas that have more or less gotten away from us recently. I'd say those are the easiest areas to recruit candidates for. In 2019, we had a candidate, Gary Pan, who decided to run again in 2021. And I can't stress enough how important it is to have someone on your slate of candidates around who can train and teach people how to walk through it. Gary was a leader. He was there with a lot of the candidates, kind of hand-holding them and being there for them. And it's really, it's a shame that he didn't make it in the House of Delegates, because he would have been a fantastic delegate, just seeing what he did and the way he trained and the leadership he had. But interestingly enough, one of the seats is Delegate Carrie Delaney's seat. Well, she took over the seat in 2017, and the Democrats didn't even run anyone to try and take that seat in 2015. We ran unopposed, okay? So we're talking about a seat that the Democrats couldn't even recruit someone to take. 2017, they flip it, and guess what happened in 2019? They ran unopposed. We didn't recruit a candidate to take it back, and that's the kind of stuff we're talking about here. That it's just no-brainer seats that had gotten away from us. The numbers didn't look great for Trump in 2016, and we just assumed it was going to stay that way, and we never tried taking it back. Those are the easier seats to recruit for, the ones where I can show in recent memory and history, look, there was a guy here, and I can get you in touch with him, or a woman who held this seat as a Republican, in the last 10 years. The more difficult seats are the ones you get closer into the Beltway, where you can't even remember when there was a Republican candidate to run. We're talking 20 years back, much less the last time a Republican held a seat. And if a Republican did hold a seat in some of these in some of these areas, it would be by the grace of God. Like, they pulled off something that no one expected to have happen. But some of these candidates, you've got to sit down, you got to have a frank conversation with them. I had a conversation with a candidate who ran in District 86, and she was at the time trying to run against Ibrahim Samira, who was going to run unopposed again. And thank God he lost his primary, but he's probably the most vicious delegate that there is in terms of, rabid socialist agenda. And she was going and saying, why is there no one running against this person? What's the deal there? And I was having dinner with her and her husband, and I go, well, what do you think? It's because people don't want to run against it. And I pointed the finger at her and I go, why don't you run? You're a school teacher. You could do a great job. And so she thought about it and prayed about it. And guess what? 2 weeks later, she sat down, she said, I'm running. I decided to run. I discerned about it. I'm ready to go. And Julie Perry was a great candidate for us. So it's just having those conversations, and they're not going to be easy. They're not going to be you selling them, snake oil and saying, look, you're going to win this seat guaranteed right away. But you got to be able to play, to people's strengths and to build out a bench over time and tell people, like, if you don't win this time, you can run again. You can establish a name rec. You can build a brand. You can run for a different seat. You can run for school board. The goal here isn't to try and win immediately. It's not going to happen in some of these counties. You've got to really start from scratch and work your way up. And so, I guess to summarize, certain areas are harder than others, but the candidates that the Democrats run make it very easy for you to recruit people, particularly when they're running people like Lee Carter and Ibrahim Samir. All you got to do is show their voting record, and then someone wants to run against them. Imagine that.
Yeah,
So
I'll echo a lot of what Sean said. It's definitely a harder ask in areas that, there hasn't been a Republican candidate for a long time. It's a very deep blue area. There's limited resources. There's often limited infrastructure on the Republican Party side. So I will say, just like from the districts that I worked to find some people for, it was easier in the Hampton Roads area. It's more difficult in places like Hampton and Norfolk and things like that. Although we had some candidates in those places, because the GOP in the Hampton Roads area is incredibly strong and well organized, who were just inspired by the people that they know. And I know Bob Heffley's on this call, and he's great down on the peninsula there. But there's a lot of folks at the local level who have spent time trying to find people who would be good candidates. Actually, Doug, one of the candidates I will say that was, I think, a surprise for a lot of folks was down on the peninsula, Delegate A.C. Cordoza, who did flip that seat. He got outspent by, I don't know, a crazy amount, probably 10-1 or more. But he's somebody who I knew him from 2019 when I believe it was 2019, he ran for city council. He's a member of the Young Republicans, Greater Peninsula. He's down there involved in the GOP. And he raised maybe, I think, $3,000 for his city council race and pretty much did it all on his own with no staff. He overperformed, but he didn't win. And then when it came time to find somebody for that seat, I know I reached out to him. A lot of other folks did as well. And he decided to run for the House of Delegates. He's now a delegate. And, it's in a district that, is probably about 7 or 8 to 10 points off. So it was a tough seat for somebody to win, but it was the right person at the right year who was willing to put in the effort. And we were able to flip a seat with really pretty limited funds and resources compared to a lot of other, hotly contested seats. So, that's a great success story to then carry forward to other districts that, people think are not winnable or would be very difficult. I think up here in Northern Virginia, it was difficult for sure, like Sean said, but we did have a lot of great people who stepped forward and said, you know what, I know that I might not win this time, but I'm going to run a couple times in a row, and I think it's worth it to contest this ground. But often all it takes is somebody asking. There's a lot of situations where just no one has asked. No one has said, hey, we need a candidate here. Do you know anyone? Or would you be willing to run? So, we had a candidate who ran in my district in Falls Church City, Sarah White. She's fantastic, but I had a very frank conversation with her when I first met her and she first kind of showed up. I sat down with her and I was like, listen, it's Falls Church. Last time we ran a candidate here was like 2013. I think they got maybe 15% of the vote or less. Do you realize that that's what you're up against? Do you realize that this might take some time? And she said, yep, I'm committed to run at least 3 cycles in a row. I know this is going to take time and we've got to build. And that's great. And she has done that. She got Nova BizPac's endorsement this year, didn't win, but way, way overperformed from what we've done in the past. And absolutely was somebody who put in that work, built connections, and is now, prepping already to run again in 2023. So it is hard to find people in these blue areas, but often the people that will step up, but people like Gary Pan and Sarah White and a lot of the candidates we had up here, they're fighters, and all it takes is somebody who says, you know, we really need this, and they're willing to jump in and lead that charge, which is really, really exciting and inspiring to see. And I think especially in tough areas for Republicans, courage is really contagious. So, you know, when we started to see that we had 1 or 2 candidates who stepped up, all of a sudden there would be 5 or 6 more who would say, you know what, actually, I'm going to do it, and would commit. And the same thing happened in, you know, the downtown Richmond area. The Richmond suburbs are very contentious. We have a lot of great incumbents in that area. But the downtown Richmond area was, I know, really tough to find a candidate for. But when people started getting in and saying, hey, we'll help out, we'll do this, we'll do that, it became a lot easier to have those conversations with people, because they knew that if they were going to step up and take the arrows, honestly, from the left, that they were going to have people behind them in the party as volunteers, other candidates in their area who were going to stand behind them and help them out. And, you know, it's really a team effort. So I think that it will be easier to recruit candidates in 2023 than it was in 2021, because there's so many people who have seen that this is worth it.
Yeah, and we weren't even going to run for 91, right? I mean, that was considered a fairly long shot seat, and that's half our margin in the House of Delegates.
Yeah, I had a couple party insiders call me and say, why are you trying to get a candidate for this district? Like, why not? Why wouldn't we? We have somebody who's willing to. So I'm glad that we did, and very exciting to have AC. He's a great guy. Yeah,
I think he's going to end up being a fantastic delegate, and I won't be surprised if he holds on to that seat quite a while. Unless he gets recruited for higher office. He's got a ton of promise. Okay, so now some of these seats that we ended up filling nominations for, I think for Republicans, our final number in 2021 was actually 98, because according to the tracker, our 46 district candidate, I think, dropped. I think right before deadline. We just didn't have time to recruit a replacement. And in the 70th district, there was an independent that we were, you know, considering a de facto Republican, because we expected him to align with our caucus when it came down to choosing a speaker.
Yeah, he was endorsed by his local unit, and he was right in downtown Richmond. So I think he thought that maybe he could get a couple more percentage points as an independent.
Right. Doug, you want to talk about getting that home stretch when we had about 88 on the roster and we were looking for those, you know, last few. I know some were in Chesapeake, and most of the rest were in Northern Virginia. You know, what was your experience for some of those more difficult seats?
Yeah, it was a lot of communication with the locals on the ground. I see Philip's with us. Philip would go on. He was a big help for us, just recognizing folks. Philip would go on just random LinkedIn pages and say, well, you know, this person might be good. Why don't we give him a call? And he would do it. So, I mean, that's how random it got towards the end, where we were just trying to get us over that finish line and get us to the end. But it was, like we said before, it was working with the locals to identify them, and then talking with them, talking it through slowly, being responsive to their needs, their questions. Some of them look scared, actually, and then having them and linking them up with the incumbents that we had already in Richmond, you know, the Dave LaRocques and the chairman and some of the other legislators. So that really helped. It was just this huge, great team effort that we had, top to bottom, the whole election cycle everywhere. So that was really just kind of the end. That was kind of how it all came about.
Now, those veteran legislators who were willing to advise, they really helped bring out some new candidates, right? I mean, there's nothing better than having an actual office holder tell them what it's going to be like. I mean, I'm still talking in the abstract when I talk to them, because we're talking about something that they're going to do. So
when they actually talk to somebody like, no, seriously, this is what this is what you need to talk to your spouse about first, that kind of stuff. I couldn't do that,
Okay, so we're about 35 minutes into this, so I want to talk about a few things before we hit our deadline. I want to talk about the preparation and training for these candidates, because we weren't just recruiting them and say good luck. We were backing them up, and that was part of how we got to our 98+1 final result. Anyone want to talk about what went on in terms of the kind of support that these new candidates especially got and help them decide?
Yeah, I'd love to take that one, David. I do want to mention a couple things before we move on to the training aspect. Is some of the difficulties that we experienced recruiting candidates, and I'm sure Jessi and Doug can attest to this. It's easier to find a candidate, I'd say, when you're closer to Richmond, because the cell is basically, you don't have to drive all the way down to Richmond, live there during the whole week during session, and then drive all the way back. When you get to candidates who are further and out away from Richmond, especially candidates with young children or family members, and those tend to make better candidates. You have a difficulty if you're trying to tell them, okay, well, you're going to have to take off work for maybe 1 month a year, 2 months a year if it's even year, and then you're going to have to go and drive down away from your family for 5 days a week, potentially 7 days a week for those 2 months, and then stay away from your family. Plus, you have to take time off work, and you probably have to take a pay cut on your salary, since the House of Delegates doesn't exactly pay per diem that's equivalent to some of the cost of living up here in Northern Virginia. So the sell there was very difficult, and I lost a couple candidates, very, very great candidates that potentially could have won because they just couldn't do it. And I don't have an answer there, but I can tell you, the Democrats, it's a lot easier because their candidates, it's almost like the responsibilities that some of our, candidates have. The Democrats, you ask like, well, what does this person do? Oh, well, they're an executive director for a nonprofit. Well, what does the nonprofit do? Oh, well, the nonprofit collects money. It's like, I have no idea what some of these people do for a job, and they're just totally fine with it. They just run for delegate and they manage to win in some of these blue areas. But Republicans are blue collar. We've got jobs, we have families to take care of and mouths to feed. So definitely a challenge there. But I guess to your question, David, the training aspect. So what I did with all of my candidates is once they were thinking about it, had given me a call back and had talked about it, I actually sat down with them and I had a whole checklist of items that I would go through them with. Things like I said, talking about the qualifications, the ballot filing requirements, the deadlines, the nomination, how to set up your website, branding, what your logo is going to be, just basically just a quick rundown of all the things you need to do in order to start as a candidate. Because I think there's just a huge barrier to entry if you're a new candidate. All these things just seem so confusing and quite frankly shocking to people who haven't seen it before that it can scare them off. So our job, at least, my job, and I took it incumbent on us in Fairfax as the party, was to provide that institutional knowledge. We've had people run before, basically just give them a box, a campaign in a box and say, do these steps, and then you're running, you're good to go. And then there's obviously the last question, which is the campaign consultants. I wasn't necessarily partisan on the consultants. I had a list of consultants that I trust, that I know personally, and I let them basically sort it out. And I gave my candidates a list of questions. I wasn't easy on them by any means. I said, look, if you don't trust this particular consultant, then ask the next one, play it up. Because I'm not trying to basically start a shop here where I'm selling campaign services. That's not my job as the party. My job as the party is to provide a platform for the candidates to stand on so they can feel like they can win an election. So the training aspect is difficult. It's kind of like, you have to fertilize the field, and then you have to spread the seed, and then you have to, water it and let it grow. So it's not going to take, it's not going to happen overnight. It takes time and takes effort. Then after that, we would host sessions during the campaign cycle. We hosted a couple for training on how to, public speech and debate, argumentation, things like fundraising. And that was mostly in conjunction with some of the larger congressional districts up here. So the 11th and the 10th congressional districts would work with the Fairfax GOP, put together some, kind of candidate training events. So it's not like for any of this stuff, we have a guide. It's not like I have a manual that the Republican Party of Virginia said, here you go, just follow this. It's really just a trial and error thing. And the way we figured a lot of these things out was by getting it wrong in Fairfax County in the last couple of years. Failure is the greatest teacher. And I can't tell you, there's no better place to fail as a Republican in than Fairfax County, except maybe Arlington. For those on the call from Arlington, I'm sorry about that, but failure is the greatest teacher, and you kind of learn and you figure it out through trial and error. So a lot of that training had to do with basically, let me tell you what not to do, and that should then dictate what you could do and how to be a better candidate.
Yeah.
It's a sales job. It's a lot of volume. You have to give yourself enough opportunities to succeed, right?
And if you don't mind, I'll give a little bit of perspective on what we did so I lived in Hampton Roads for like 7 years before I moved up to Northern Virginia last year. So I have known a lot of the folks in the party structure involved with politics and local stuff down there. So a lot of the candidates that I recruited were down in the Hampton Roads area. Some of them were up here, but mostly down there. So one of the things from the training aspect that I think, was helpful, and, I heard from candidates was helpful. I would have the initial conversation with people who were potentially interested. And honestly, some of them were scared off by, I probably had a very similar checklist to Sean with, hey, this is XYZ, what you need to do, the things that you need to think about, the conversations that you should have before you decide to do this. Obviously, like if you're married, talk to your spouse. If you're, if you have kids, talk to your kids. You think through these things before you decide. And there were some people that scared off, and there were some people who said, okay, this is going to work for me. I can do it with my job. I can do it with my family. And so, that was really important as a stage of this recruitment. But then once there were people who were, I would say 80-90% committed, and really starting to explore the nuts and bolts of what they needed to do to get a campaign launched. One of the most helpful things that we did for a lot of the Hampton Roads candidates that were first timers was that we would organize basically a Zoom call, and it would be maybe 5 to 10 people, and I would try to find GOP folks, local electeds who are Republicans, if we had a House of Delegates member nearby in a, neighboring community, or someone like that, and brought those people all together and basically had an hour to 2 hour long sit down with the person who was thinking about running. And everyone would kind of share their experiences in the community, their checklist of things to do. And we had people who had standard things, the 4th District Chairman, Carrie Allen, who is on a lot of these. She's fantastic. She is a soil and water commissioner. And so she's run for local office and she's familiar with this. And so part of what she would always tell every single candidate is, okay, you need to, get a map printout from VPAP of your district. You need to go drive to every single precinct in the district with a notepad. You need to write down what you see there. You need to, get out of your car, walk around and talk to people in all these places, so that these people could get really familiar with the boundaries of their district and what was going on there. And, if there was any local issues, they would know what those were. And so, so there was very practical advice that folks who had done that could walk the candidates through. And basically, we would each assign them, a homework assignment for a checklist of what they needed to do to get up and running. And provide them, here's a list of 10 people in your city that you need to call and talk to and have a conversation with that, might give you money or might, give you a pointer, or, this is a pastor from a church that you need to meet with. So things like that are kind of the insider knowledge on the community and the district was really important for us to get a lot of those candidates launched. And then, I did a very similar thing to Sean. I know a number of consultants from different companies in Virginia. I actually spoke with several of them and kind of talked about what we were doing. And obviously this is their business, so they're excited about more clients. And many of them were willing to offer lower cost services than they normally would in some of these districts that were difficult to win. And so, we would often say, here's a list of, 3 or 5 different consultants who are willing to work with you. Go talk to all of them, ask them your questions, ask them, figure out if you mesh together well, figure out what they're willing to provide you, and, pick who you think is the best fit. And so, all of those things, it's so hard to navigate. And often for these first time people, they don't know, what kind of staff is normal on a campaign even. They don't know, how they can find somebody to be their treasurer to file their paperwork. But even just, I know David had a list of volunteers, and we had a list of different people in different areas who, have been a treasurer on a local candidate's campaign or something like that, who have done it before. And we could, give them 2 or 3 emails and say, these people know what they're doing. Go call them, find somebody who's willing to volunteer their time. And so, these are the things that break down some of the barriers to entry, to Sean's point, that a lot of people feel like there are when they're trying to learn how to run for office. And then, there's lots of different groups that did good classes. And I know Fairfax GOP did great classes on some of the soft skills of running for office. But a lot of this was trying to, as early as possible, get these people tied in with their community and their district of supporters, so that they could learn from past experiences, past successes and failures, and then hopefully be able to start from a stronger position.
Yeah, let me add something to that. Sean said something in the beginning that was eye-opening for me too, and I learned. If you have a few minutes, go to the websites of our Democrat legislators in the Senate and the House in Richmond. You will see some outlandish professions. You'll remember Barack Obama was a community organizer. I mean, obviously he has 3 months to go to Springfield and be a state senator. Some of those professions you'll see from the left down in Richmond are going to be like, what is that? So, but adding to the training part of it, the Virginia Project was one of the many. I mean, there were so many folks out there helping train candidates. Well, we did it. We did a tad bit different. We brought in actual national speakers, Washington, D.C. I know, swampy guys, but they were guys all had, almost all of them had presidential campaign experience. So the candidates that joined us and that watched our videos that we put out got a chance to hear great stories from Iowa, New Hampshire, and all these other things, and help them, because at the end of the day, these campaigns are, if they're all that's why they call it the nuts and bolts and the fundamentals. They can apply any of this stuff, but the guys were really patient with the new candidates. They explain. I mean, there were so many elementary questions that some of the candidates had, just about that you would never know just entering politics. What does this mean? What is it? Why do these numbers add up like this? Or, just developing a message for your campaign. So a lot of that, we spent a few weeks. Our classes were a couple of nights a week, a couple hours a night for almost a month. So we reached as many as we could. And, in conjunction with the caucus down in Richmond, who also had their school, a lot of the county parties had schools. And I don't know if the state party did, but they must have helped. They might have helped with the caucus, but it wasn't for a lack of education out there for the candidates.
Yeah, we got a really good. We put together a really good presentation. Those speakers knew exactly what they were doing in great detail. So that's going to be very useful, I think. It wasn't just useful this past cycle, but it's going to be useful moving forward. If you're a candidate or potential candidate out there, feel free to ask us. We'll show you our training materials. We want you to learn everything, and that's why we put it together. Okay.
Could I add something here, please?
Oh, absolutely.
I don't want to suck up all your time and your air. I
Yeah.
want to thank Jessi again for the props she gave me a few minutes ago. There's a shortcut that I used on all this recruitment and so forth. And in 2019, December 2019, we had our first Second Amendment kerfuffle all around the state. And I was the chairman of Hampton at the time. And I'm not now. I live near Charlottesville. But we had like 400 people show up for a city council meeting, all Second Amendment people. Most of them had no political leanings. Some of them hadn't voted before, most of them younger. And instead of talking to city council, I stayed in the lobby, myself and other people got all these names and all these numbers and so forth. And then in 2020, January, same thing happened again. Point being, Tim Anderson, who's also a freshman guy who prevailed, he was running around to all these things. and he and I put on he put out an email to all these folks saying anybody interested in running for office of any kind, city council or school board or so forth. And we had like 27 people show up at a library. Tim went through all the procedures, like Sean, you mentioned, all the do list of what you had to do and so forth. But then he turned it over to me. I says, folks, there's two things you have to go forward. You have to have at least 5, preferably 15 people who are ready to give up every weekend of their life until election day for you. You have to have ideally 15, preferably $25,000 to get in this game. Now, you may not have it yourself, but you got to go find it. After I said that, we hung around. Most people, there was only one taker out of 27 people. Many of them came in thinking, I could run for office. I could do that job. That looks like fun. But the simple reality of the personnel resources devoted to you because they like you, and the money is something up front, and you can eliminate a whole lot of people at the bottom. So I got one candidate, one guy who was just businessman, 20K, no problem. I can do better than that. Yeah, I got a lot of people. And by the way, AC Cordosa came out of that movement.
Yes, I was going to say, didn't AC come from the Hampton Second Amendment movement?
AC was an Obama campaigner.
Mm-hmm.
I saw him talk to the city council. I pulled him aside. I said, why don't you come hang out with us a little bit? He's an open carry guy, which he's smart enough not to do what Amanda Chase has done and try to open carry in Richmond. But anyhow, I says, hang out with us, no pressure. Here's a Republican creed. We keep it on a, you've seen them, Jessi, the Hampton cards. We had their creed put on the back. And he amazed me when he ran for city council. He called me one night and says, well, Bob, what if I don't win? After I finished laughing, I said, AC, you're not going to win this, but you're going to get the name recognition. You're going to build but let me mention one other thing. Jessi, I don't know if you know Benjamin Siff.
Yes,
ran in the 92nd.
Benjamin's a great guy. Yep.
92nd, deep, darkest blue area. I'm one of the people guilty of not running somebody over there for a couple of years. And part of the problem is there was no help from upstairs at RPV. That's changing. Yep, and David, I'll tell you, the buzz you started about getting candidates, I didn't even know who you were, but it had an effect. Because as I was leaving Hampton, gave up the job and had my successor, I said, this is going to be embarrassing. We got to find somebody for the 92nd. These people are just, we're dirt to them if we don't have now, if we can't win it. My successor put up his son, who was out-of-state college senior. And teaching point here, he didn't win. He tried real hard. He campaigned well. But the data we have on the 92nd actually won 2 precincts, which hadn't been even thought of before. The incremental data that we have saying, hey, we drove a wedge into that. And next time, by God, we're going to do better. Maybe we could even win. So that's what you have to tell some of these candidates who are going on a kamikaze mission in a deep blue area. There will be benefits if you do it well. And you'll be amazed at the people that you might get votes from who didn't bother, or who had nobody to vote for, no Republican before. And then you see where they are. So enough said. I won't take up any more of your time.
Jordan Gray's another great guy you had down there. And
yes.
You had quite the power team.
Yeah.
Thank you, Bob. Yeah, I remember we spoke quite a bit early on in the process, and I'm really glad that to hear my efforts kind of motivated people to get it done. And I think once people kind of picked up on it, it was a pretty intense and focused thing, and obviously we had so much success. So
yeah, yeah, and it was kind of a pride thing. I don't know who these people are, but they're talking bad on us because we're not, and they're right. You have to understand leadership. There really wasn't any in RPV. I took over as a unit chair, didn't want to. I was forced into it. And I never depended on the state central committee. I still don't know what they do. I never depended on RPV for anything. That's all changing. But it's going to take them a while to turn this ship around. It doesn't turn like a destroyer. It's more like an aircraft carrier. But so Rich Anderson's a good guy, and I've talked to him a lot about this. A whole echelon of management has been missing in this whole process, and those are the 8 district chairs. I'm still on the Virginia Fair Elections Committee. I don't know if you know much about that. I was one of the founders of it, but and they keep forgetting about these district chairs who should be riding herd on those units. It's 136 of them, and some of them are really in bad shape. So that makes a big difference. A good district chair can make a huge difference, and nobody even realizes they're there. And I told Rich, you need to crack a whip on these guys. And what people don't remember either is they're all elected officials. I was in an ad hoc group that says, we got to get rid of some of these unit chairs that aren't doing anything. Do you realize they are elected? So are the district chairs. They're elected, so you can't fire them. You got to work through the political system.
Well, if people want better unit committees, then they should join those committees so that they can vote the people who will be more effective into the positions where they can be so, or support the existing people so that they can be more effective. Sometimes they just don't have the manpower. So if you want better committees, you got to get that in there yourself and see what's going on. Do you need to help the leadership? Is the leadership just not up for it? You need to make that decision on the ground. All right, let me see here. We're getting around to the end of our hour. I want to just address one question that I saw. Our election trackers for 2022 and 23 should be coming out this week. I got the code together, and I'm just loading up the data and verifying things. Everything got a little bit discombobulated by all the redistricting. It's not in 2021. I had half my data just assuming all the delegates who hadn't announced that they weren't going to run for re-election, that they would. So I mean that was half the districts right there, and then it was only another 20 or so seats that we actually had to had data on until we started all this effort. All right. So anyone have any final comments? And anyone have anything that they want to make sure everybody has on the record when they view how to view recruit candidates?
I will just say, this is something that through the Young Republicans, our demographic is 18 to 40, so it's mostly young professionals and young families. And one of the things that we started about 2 years ago following 2019 was Why Ours Run, where we're trying to encourage our members to get prepared to run for office. And that includes party office, to Bob's point, and to David's point, because if you want something done, we're a party of personal responsibility. And so I strongly believe that it's all of our responsibilities to make sure that that happens. If you see a problem, come with a solution. And so, from my perspective, candidate recruitment and leadership training never stops, because this really is building a bench of leaders, both within the party and for people who are going to be candidates. That never stops. Candidate training never stops. Candidate recruitment never stops. Virginia has elections every year, and we always have to be prepared for this. And we need to have people who are willing to fill in the gaps in the future. We need to have people who are running for school board and city council now who, 2, 5, 6, 8 years from now are going to be running for House of Delegates, state Senate, Congress, whatever. So if you want to be involved in this, absolutely start now, do it. There's no time like the present. I'm sure anybody on this call would be willing to also help out, talk, or advise, or come help whatever groups you have. I know I'm on Twitter, I'm on Facebook a lot. This is my name, so you can find me. I'm always happy to help wherever I can, whether it's young Republicans or older Republicans. We call you alumni or emeritus members, but anyone, because I think that it's all of our responsibility to build a strong Republican Party and keep it that way.
Amen.
Yeah, let me just say that's an interesting point you had there, Jesse. These are the candidates that we find now are going to be the ones down the road that run for higher office, and we're building the bench as we move forward. If you guys will remember back to 2010, when the Republicans absolutely cleaned up nationwide in the midterm elections. I mean, we won 60 to 70 House and Senate seats at the national level, but we also won, I just saw the number again today, 860 state legislative seats that year. That just cleaned the bench on the left. And you could see through the years, through 2012, 14, 16, how as those folks moved up, that's why their leadership is all in their early hundreds. And why their presidential candidates were so weak last couple of cycles is because their bench was just decimated in 2010. So this stuff is laying the groundwork for next year and the year after and the year after that.
If I could speak up, I've had my hand raised for quite a while, and I sat aside and played like I was in the waiting room. Could I have a moment?
Go ahead.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
First of all, I really appreciate what you're doing. I really appreciate it, and I think it's absolutely necessary. I think I'm out in Campbell County, south of Lynchburg. This is flyover Virginia. We hear about it all the time. I don't know that there's been a lot of content tonight that really addressed that area. I'm in the 5th District, Congressional District. I'd like to talk with Jessi some more about young Republicans and getting them involved in our area. We had a bunch of people involved, and then there was a conflict. You may or may not be aware. They were very helpful. I reached out to them. They were coming and participating. I'd like to see if we could get them active again in some form. Nothing like young people. We have different issues. Most of this seemed to be focused on Northern Virginia, East Coast, most of the blue, quote, blue areas. I still believe Virginia is Republican. I think the state or Commonwealth Party and the National Party have failed us. I do think Rich Anderson has reached out to rural Virginia more than any chairman in my memory. And you can tell by my white beard, I have a long memory. I also think that one thing that the Youngkin campaign did, that the Trump campaign did, you don't hear much about it. Everybody thinks, well, we picked a moderate candidate who everybody could get behind. I think the thing that the Youngkin campaign did was he held on, made a decent presentation in the quote, blue part of the Commonwealth, but he spent more time in rural Virginia. His bus must have got as many miles as Trump's jet. He spent a lot of time here. For those of you who don't know it, many of our districts based our allocation of ballots on past history. Many of our districts in the 5th District, many of our counties, units, cities in the 5th District ran out of ballots because nobody expected the turnout we had. I think that was fairly common across the Commonwealth. I think that was the biggest thing that the Youngkin campaign did was reach out to all of Virginia and hold his own in the blue parts, but really get voters fired up in the rural parts, the parts where we're all conservative, we're all Republican, and get us off our butts and get us to go to the ballot and vote. Too many times in the past, we've sat on our butts and didn't go vote. That's been, as a unit chairman in Campbell County, that's been one of my biggest challenges is getting people to get active and get involved. Now, to the more to the point of tonight's meeting, I really appreciate your reaching out to us about how to educate and train candidates. One of the biggest things we had was we basically hold the board of supervisors in Campbell County, but we had nobody interested in the school board, which is where we train up the future. Nobody cared. I have to give Northam. I have to give Loudoun County, and an experienced pro like Terry McAuliffe making gaffes he made like he did, plus Glenn Youngkin just making solid presentations and following up on what he did. I think if he continues to follow up, if the RPV continues to reach out to fly over Virginia, I think it will help all of us in the rural areas uh, fill up some of the school board seats. Lynchburg has a real problem winning back. Uh, uh, Lynchburg is a Republican town with Liberty University, but the Democrats have managed to maneuver and take that over. We'd appreciate help there. We're the next county over, but we're helping them. We just need to get more people involved. And I thank you again. I've gone on. I appreciate David, you, Doug, Sean, and Jessi representing a future for Republicans in Virginia. I hope you'll continue to do this. I hope you'll also continue to reach out to Flyover Virginia, because we play a really important role in electing senators and in future elections, but we could also use a lot of help. The one area we have a problem in that we're working on is local candidates don't have any idea what they're getting involved in. And so we're already starting an initiative for the next 2 years, getting them involved. And I think you guys, what you're starting here, will be a huge help. And I hope to continue to follow up with you, and hope you keep me in your mailing list and keep us up to date. I've been trying to get our district captains, which we didn't have before this year, to sign up. I'm going to really get on their case because they didn't. We need to, at the local level, like you're saying here, get involved. So I'll get off my soapbox. I'll lower my hand, and I thank you very much for what you're doing. Thank you for letting me speak up. Thank you.
Doug, I will say we are restarting a YR group in your area, and also we did so actually not in the 5th district, in the 9th district. I did bring a YR national deployment to help out Jason Ballard out there, because I think it's important, just from this perspective of statewide leadership, for an auxiliary to show and to invest effort in flyover parts of Virginia. I like to call it real Virginia. But in the southwest area of Virginia, South Central Virginia, because, like you said, turnout there was absolutely key to the election this year. And, in order to get that turnout, we need to be connecting with people in those communities. So thank you.
David, if you please share my email address with all these people, I'd appreciate it, just so we can stay in touch. And Jessi, I look forward to working with you.
We definitely haven't forgotten about flyover country. The reality for recruiting statewide candidates is we didn't have any problem at all finding candidates in rural areas and in GOP areas. Almost all of the districts were Democrat districts. There were uphill fights that people had declined to take on because we'll say short-term thinking. But you do raise a great point that what we did on the state level really does need to get down to the local level, where all the offices in each jurisdiction need to be accounted for, and every cycle that they're up, somebody needs to have a name on the, that's either backed by the GOP if it's nonpartisan, or if it is partisan, an explicit GOP name on that ballot. One achievement that we had from this effort was that we effectively restored the right to vote for state representative to something like 22% of the state, because they would have had one name on the ballot, and that's not a meaningful right to vote. That's Soviet Union. So that was probably the greatest of all services that we did with this effort for the people of Virginia. So I don't want this to run over long and abuse our gracious guests for having us, for joining us tonight. I think we got a lot of good information about what happened that will hopefully be useful to others. And I guess I'll try and answer what questions I can, but if you have interest in anything we went over tonight, obviously reach out to us at Virginia Project. You can reach out to Jessi at Young Republicans, and whatever we can do to move the project forward, that's what we're here to do. I'm going to scan the chat for any last questions. Anybody has any last comments or questions, feel free to speak up.
I'm Veronica. Doug, I just want to say thank you for bringing up Lynchburg. I'm in Lynchburg, fellow neighbor, and we have a plan, and we'll, after our chair elections, because our LRCC chair election, and I'm running for chair, so that we will have a confirmation on the date for that election next Thursday at our called meeting. And we think it's going to be in March 19th. And then after that, we're going to proceed forward with our nominations for our city council. And then we're going to need some help, some support from our neighbors. Definitely. We've been very blessed to have Amber Haskew, which some of you probably know, to really step in there and try to help us really help turn the party here around a lot and identifying candidates. And she's been really good with that, but she's leaving to move to South Dakota next summer. So I'm a little nervous because we have to all be Ambers. And that's why I jumped on tonight, because I'm like, I got to figure out what Amber knows, right? And do my own training and due diligence, because she's so good at identifying those people. So we actually have 4 or 5 good candidates for the 3 at-large seats that we have nominees to put up, and we are praying that we can take Lynchburg back. We have the opportunity to flip our majority from a 5-2 Democrat to a 5-2 Republican in 2022. And like you talked about, Jessi, and all of you, when I moved here in 2018, and I was in Henrico County before that, and I was stunned that it was blue here in Lynchburg City. And so I started asking. I found out we haven't had a majority in city council in 20 years. And when I asked why, and I keep hearing the same things you've talked about, we haven't put up candidates in the school board, and we haven't put up candidates in city council. That's why we haven't. So thank you.
Yeah, you got it. They just grabbed everything that we left untended. They grabbed it all, and anytime we let a seat go, they would be all over it. They're like the Borg. They'll assimilate anything. So yeah.
David, if I could just make a really quick point to that, because we noticed the same thing pretty much all across the state of Virginia. I don't know if anyone has ever played the game of Risk. It's a very basic game. The idea is you have to keep one piece on a piece of property that you own. So as you start to, expand, you start to spread yourself out. You start to get kind of spread too thin. I think that's what the Democrats did. I think that they've expanded all across Virginia, far beyond their resources or capacity at all levels of government. And now they're like, too much bread scraped with too little butter scraped across too much bread. And I think it's time to start pushing back. And Veronica, I'm very glad to hear what you're doing out there in Lynchburg. Doug and Bob, all across the county and all across the country, the state. It's just exciting to see, because Virginia is a red state, and the Democrats are going to realize that, and they're going to start to not know what to do because they spread themselves too thin. There's not going to be enough resources for them next year. There's not going to be enough, support that they're going to need. And so all we're going to need from you guys is to keep recruiting candidates, train them, retain them, and then send them out there. Make sure we can win.
Hey, Sean, you really, really just nailed it. In Campbell County, and in fact, 5th District, Republicans always have a ground game. We have yard signs. We have door knockers. What the Democrats have is outside money, TV ads, radio ads, and we're finally getting. I mean, we're starting to raise more money, but that's also causing us to get off our butts more and work door to door more. I think the big difference is the Democrats have money, we have ground game, and I'm hoping that as we knock on doors and talk to individual people, that's true in Lynchburg too. As we talk to more people personally, it seems to be making a difference. But yeah, we got to do more to raise money. That's one of our focuses for the next cycle. Sorry to break in again, but you nailed it. The Democrats spread themselves too thin. They have no ground game. They have no depth. And if we could just take advantage of those weaknesses, the shallow support they have, I think that's the path we need to focus on. Thank you very much for making that point. And by the way, I'm a German too. Put an umlaut over the A, and you got me.
Love it. Thank you, Doug. Appreciate it.
Okay.
David, you're on mute. David, you're still on mute.
David's still on mute.
Okay. We're running a bit over schedule, so I just want to thank everybody for coming tonight. I think we had a really productive discussion. If it was bounced around a bit, but I think we touched all the major topics. Before we go, I just want to shout out to a couple of people whose contributions may be insufficiently mentioned tonight. That would be Rich Anderson, the chairman of the party, whose backing of all this really helped solidify it as a statewide effort. And also Nick Profit, the chairman in Chesapeake, who played a lead role in filling 6 of the most difficult seats that there were in the entire roster. So thank you, Jessi. Thank you, Sean. Thank you, Doug Simon. And thank you, everybody, for participating tonight. Again, our trackers for 2022 and 2023 will be out probably this week. And please follow up with us or with Jessi or with Fairfax GOP. You probably don't want to follow up with the Florida Office of Drug Control, where Doug is at the moment. But we're one team. We're here to free the Commonwealth and to keep it that way. And this is a long-term affair, and we're all in this together, folks. So let's do the best we can. All right, have a good night, everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you, Jessi. Thank you, Sean. Thank you, Doug. Good night.